Welcome back to the deep dive. I have to admit, I've been staring at the title of today's source material for about 20 minutes, trying to decide if it's, well, if it's the most optimistic thing I've ever read or if it's genuinely terrifying.
That is usually the sign of a really good deep dive. What are we looking at today?
So we are digging into a framework, and it's titled Toward the Maximum Allowable Freedom. And the reason I'm so conflicted is that it completely dismantles the way we usually picture the future.
Okay.
You know how in almost every sci-fi story, take Star Trek, for example,
Got it.
the future is this amazing post-scarcity paradise.
Right, yeah, the Federation. You've got no money, food replicators, nobody goes hungry.
Exactly. But think about the actual structure of the Federation. It's essentially a massive, benevolent military bureaucracy.
That's true, yeah.
You have admirals, you have captains, strict hierarchies, rules for literally everything. And we just sort of assume that as civilization gets more advanced, the government has to get bigger and smarter to manage it all.
Right, that is the standard assumption. We tend to equate civilization with administration. If you have more people and more complex tech, you obviously need more managers.
Well, this deep dive says basically wrong.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the core assertion here, and I'm quoting the text directly, is that a post-scarcity civilization does not need to be governed, it needs to be freed.
Wow. Okay, that is a radical pivot.
Right.
The argument there is that the long-term goal of a mature civilization isn't to optimize the government, like to make the bureaucracy perfect, but to actually dissolve it and engineer the system so that institutions just become completely obsolete.
Which, sounds great on a bumper sticker. But when I actually sit down and think about it, it just sounds like chaos.
Sure.
If you dissolve the rules, don't you just end up with the purge? I mean, who maintains the roads? Who stops the murderers?
That is the knee-jerk reaction, and frankly, it's a completely valid fear. But the text frames this not as political anarchy, but as a systems engineering optimum.
Okay, what did that mean?
It argues that our current need for rules isn't because humans are naturally evil or chaotic, but because we are constantly dealing with scarcity.
So if we fix the scarcity, we don't need the cage.
That's the hypothesis. But to really understand why, we have to go back to the beginning. We need to look at why we built these cages, these institutions in the first place. The text calls this the historical anchor.
Okay, let's do the history. The text cites James C. Scott's book, Against the Grain. I've heard of this. It's about how early agriculture wasn't necessarily a step up for humanity, right?
Yeah, it wasn't just about diet or health. Scott's argument is really about control. He asks a deceptively simple question. Why did almost all early states form around grain? Wheat, rice, barley. Why not potatoes? Why not chickpeas?
They just assumed it was calories, like grain is filling.
It's actually physics. Think about a potato. If the tax collector comes to your village to take your crop and you're growing potatoes, you can literally just leave them in the ground.
Oh, because they're hidden?
Exactly. If the army comes and burns your village, the potatoes are fine. You can dig them up later and eat them. They're very hard to tax and very hard to confiscate.
But wheat stands up.
Wheat stands up. It ripens all at the exact same time. You have to cut it, thresh it, and store it in a big, highly visible pile in a granary. It is, as Scott puts it, visible, storable, and rationable.
Wow. So the government didn't invent agriculture to feed people. The government formed around the crops that were easiest to steal.
In a way, yes. The granary becomes the center of power. You build a wall around it, you put soldiers on the wall to guard the grain, and suddenly you have a state.
You have a government?
Right. You are managing the scarcity of food. The institution only exists because food is scarce and needs to be rationed and protected.
That makes the government sound like a glorified grocery manager with a spear.
For a large chunk of human history, that's exactly what it was. But it's not just food. The source moves on from food to Thomas Hobbes and the Leviathan. This is about the scarcity of security.
I remember Hobbes from Philosophy 101. Life is nasty, brutish, and short.
Right. Hobbes argued that in our natural state, everyone is a threat to everyone else. True security is incredibly scarce. So we make a deal.
The social contract.
Exactly. We trade our natural freedom to a central authority, the Leviathan, and in exchange, the Leviathan promises we won't get stabbed in our sleep.
It's basically a protection racket. Nice life you have here, shame if something happened to it, pay your taxes, follow the rules, and I'll keep you safe.
Crucially, though, we accept it because the alternative is worse. We accept the loss of freedom because safety is scarce. But the text goes even deeper than food and safety. It gets into the scarcity of knowledge and opportunity.
Yeah.
This is where it brings in Michel Foucault and Pierre Bourdieu.
Oh, man. the heavy hitters of sociology. How do they fit into a post-scarcity framework?
Well, think about how the church or early universities operated. For centuries, physical books were rare. Literacy was rare. If you wanted to know the truth, whether that's how to get into heaven or how the planets move, you had to go through an institution.
The institution was the gatekeeper.
Precisely. Foucault argues that power is inextricably linked to who controls that knowledge. And Bourdieu talks about social capital. Who gets the official stamp of approval?
Who gets the degree?
Right. Who gets the credential that says, I am an expert? Institutions decided who moved up and who stayed down. They managed the scarcity of opportunity.
Okay, I am definitely seeing the pattern here. Food, safety, knowledge, status, all these things were severely limited. So we built these massive hierarchies, governments, churches, universities, just to ration them out and keep order.
Correct. And that system worked, more or less, for 5,000 years. But here is the major pivot point of the entire deep dive. What happens when the underlying condition, the scarcity itself, evaporates?
Right, this is where we get into the sci-fi stuff. The text talks about a massive convergence of technologies.
It mentions three main pillars. First, energy. We're talking about the long-term trend toward advanced solar, fusion, maybe eventually even Dyson spheres, and moving up the Kardashev scale.
Harnessing the power of a whole star.
Exactly. The idea is that energy becomes so completely abundant it's effectively free.
Okay, and the second is matter. The text references K. Eric Drexler and his book Engines of Creation. This is nanotechnology, right? Advanced 3D printing.
Right. Imagine a world where you don't need a global supply chain to get a toaster or a replacement car part. You just download the schematic, and the fabrication machine in your garage assembles it atom by atom.
Which sounds wild, but then the third pillar is information, which we are literally already seeing.
Yeah.
The internet has made the cost of copying knowledge zero.
Yeah, Jeremy Rifkin calls this the zero marginal cost society.
So you put those three together: infinite energy, automated atomic manufacturing, and universal access to knowledge. The source argues that in this scenario, the entire historical rationale for coercive institutions just collapses.
It does.
But wait, just because I can 3D print a burger in my kitchen doesn't mean I don't need laws.
True. But do you need a Department of Agriculture to manage grain silos? Do you need a massive, bloated trade bureaucracy to manage shipping lanes if nothing physical is actually being shipped?
Good point.
The text argues that when you completely remove the scarcity, the institutions that were built to manage that scarcity don't just become useless. They become pathological.
Pathological, like a disease.
Think about it this way. Imagine a water rationing board in a city that sits right in the middle of a barren desert. They are the most important people in town. They literally decide who lives and who dies.
Okay, tracking.
Now, imagine the climate changes. Suddenly, it rains fresh, clean water every single day. The reservoirs are overflowing. The scarcity is completely gone. What does the water rationing board do? Do they just say, great job, everyone, we're retiring?
No way. Bureaucracies never retire. They'd probably start regulating the rain. They'd be like, is this rain certified safe? Do you have a government permit to catch this rain in your yard?
Precisely. They create artificial scarcity. They literally invent new rules just to justify their own existence because their original purpose, rationing a limited resource, is gone. And the source argues that this is the exact danger zone we are entering right now. The bureaucracy itself becomes the only thing standing between us and abundance.
That is a terrifying thought. It's like the institution becomes a parasite on the very society it's supposed to be serving.
Which brings us to the core equation of the text. If the goal of civilization isn't to ration stuff anymore, what is it? The text proposes a new metric, the global maxima of allowable freedom.
Okay, that sounds like a complicated math problem.
It is absolutely treated as an engineering problem. The goal is to maximize the sheer volume of possible actions available to every single human being. Now, obviously, freedom isn't infinite.
Right, I don't have the freedom to just walk up and punch you in the face.
Because that reduces my freedom to not be punched. This goes back to John Stuart Mill's harm principle. My freedom ends where your nose begins. You want to hit the global maximum without violating that boundary.
But the text also makes a big deal about distinguishing between negative liberty and positive liberty. I always get these mixed up. Can we break that down for the listener?
Sure. Think of it like a highway system. Negative liberty is just the absence of roadblocks. The government says, we won't stop you from driving.
Which is great.
It is. But if you don't actually own a car, or you can't afford gas, or you literally don't know how to drive, that wide open road is completely useless to you.
Right. You're theoretically free to drive, but you lack the actual capacity to do it.
Exactly. Positive liberty, which connects heavily to Amartya Sen's capability approach, is making sure you actually have the car, the gas, and the map.
Okay, I see.
The source argues that a true post-scarcity civilization should focus equally on removing the barriers and providing the capacity.
So the government's entire job basically boils down to, 1, don't let people hurt each other, and 2, give everyone the baseline tools to do whatever they want.
And that leads directly to the flip side of the equation, the global minima of rulemaking. The text argues that institutions should shrink to the absolute smallest size mathematically necessary to ensure safety and coordination.
I got to be honest, this sounds a whole lot like political libertarianism. Are we just reading a really fancy academic version of taxation is theft?
It definitely echoes some of those ideas, but the underlying grounding is totally different. It's not arguing from a moral stance of inherent property rights. It's arguing from a strict systems theory stance.
How so?
Well, it references Elinor Ostrom, who actually won a Nobel Prize for studying the commons.
What did she find? Because I always hear about the tragedy of the commons, like if nobody owns it, everyone destroys it.
Right. The conventional wisdom was that if you let people manage a shared resource, like a grazing field or a fishery, without a central government forcing rules on them, they'll inevitably destroy it. But Ostrom went out and actually looked at real-world communities.
Yeah.
She found that people are perfectly capable of self-governing without a massive leviathan breathing down their necks as long as they have the right communication and coordination tools.
So we don't actually need a big brother to keep us from destroying the planet. We just need better ways to talk to each other and coordinate.
In a post-scarcity context, yes. The argument is that anything beyond basic safety and coordination is defined as coercion. If a rule exists just to keep things orderly or because that's how we've always done it, it's just waste. It's unnecessary friction in the system.
Okay, but here's my massive problem with this whole utopian vision. It relies entirely on people being well. Adults. Smart, responsible, fully autonomous adults. And when I look around at the world right now, I see a lot of people who seem to actively want to be told what to do.
That is what the text calls the human software problem. And the source argues that this lack of autonomy isn't an accident, it's a deliberate design feature of our current education system.
Man, this part of the deep dive hit me hard. It talks about institutional dependency.
It references Ivan Illich here and Bourdieu again. Think about your own schooling. If you think about your own life, what is the primary lesson you actually learn in 12 years of school? It's not math, and it's certainly not history.
It's how to sit still, how to wait for the bell to ring.
It's how to ask for permission.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You have to ask for permission to speak. You have to ask for permission to go to the bathroom. You are trained day after day for over a decade that you do not actually own your own time or your own body.
You're being trained to be a compliant worker in a scarcity-driven factory economy.
So we are literally engineering people to be dependent on authority, and then we turn around and say, oh, we can't possibly have freedom. People just aren't responsible enough.
It's a total self-fulfilling prophecy. If you cage an animal from birth, and then one day you just open the door, it won't leave.
Okay.
It's terrified of the outside.
Exactly. So the text calls for a complete ground-up overhaul of education, moving toward what it calls autonomy engineering.
Autonomy engineering. That sounds incredibly cool, but what does it actually look like in practice?
It's about shifting the entire goal of education from compliance to epistemic sovereignty.
Epistemic sovereignty, that is a mouthful.
It just means owning your own understanding of the world. Instead of teaching students to just blindly memorize the map that the teacher hands them, you teach them how to be cartographers. You teach them how to draw their own maps.
Okay, it cites Seymour Papert here, the learning by doing guy.
Yes, Papert. He believed that you learn by constructing, by wrestling with messy problems yourself, not by just being fed the correct answers. And it also brings in Paulo Freire, who wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed.
Right.
His whole point was that education shouldn't be about banking facts into a student's head. It should be the practice of freedom. It's about building psychological resilience.
So the punchline here is, the goal of education shouldn't be to prepare you to fit into a job at an institution. The goal should be to prepare you so that institutions are completely unnecessary. You don't need a boss.
Exactly, to create a human being who is psychologically resilient enough to live without a script. Because that's what a post-scarcity society is. It's life without a script.
But, and here is the giant elephant in the room. We're currently building something that might just write the script for us. We have to talk about AI.
Ah, yes. The superintelligence twist.
Right. Usually, when we combine the ideas of post-scarcity and AI, The story is that the AI just takes over completely.
Mm.
Humans are messy and dumb, so the AI becomes the ultimate benevolent dictator. It solves all the allocation problems, but we just become, I don't know, pets.
That is the Wall-E future, or the I, robot future, but our source actually flips this narrative entirely, using what it calls the Orion's Arm insight.
Oh, this is from that massive collaborative online world-building project, right?
It is. The insight there is that a truly advanced, mature superintelligence wouldn't actually want to be a micromanager. It views governance not as ruling over people, but simply as infrastructure.
What's the difference there?
Let's think about traffic again. Right now, to manage the scarcity of space on the road, we have dumb rules. Speed limits, stop signs, red lights, and we have coercive enforcement police hiding in bushes giving out tickets. It actively forces you to stop when you don't want to.
And half the time, I'm sitting at a red light at 3 in the morning with literally no one else on the road, feeling like an absolute idiot.
Right. That's a dumb system. Now imagine a system where every single car is fully autonomous and constantly talking to every other car on the grid.
Okay.
There are no traffic lights, there are no stop signs. You just drive, your car adjusts its speed slightly, another car merges perfectly in front of you, and you just flow seamlessly through the intersection without ever stopping.
So the complex coordination is still happening in the background, but I don't feel ruled.
Exactly. The AI acts as the invisible coordination layer. It removes the friction of other people without removing your freedom to move. The text argues that a superintelligence acts as a liberator.
It handles the insanely high complexity of billions of interactions so that coercion just isn't necessary anymore.
Yes. It brings in thinkers like Nick Bostrom and his concept of coherent extrapolated volition, and Eliezer Yudkowsky's work on friendly AI, along with Max Tegmark.
Right, all the big AI safety names.
The consensus it draws from them is that AI removes the bottleneck of knowledge asymmetry. It doesn't hoard power at the top. It distributes the ability to understand and navigate the world to everyone.
It creates governance by design rather than governance by decree. You don't need armed guards and laws if the physical environment itself is engineered to prevent conflict.
It's a highly optimistic view, but I can't help but feel like we are a very, very long way from that reality.
We are. But as we move into the outro here, the source asks us to zoom out and look at the long arc of history. It traces these very distinct phases of human development.
We started with basic survival hunter-gatherers, just fighting for enough calories to make it through winter.
Then we moved into scarcity management, the age of agriculture, states, and empires.
Then industrial bureaucracy, mass production, standardized schools, giant factories.
And then the era of knowledge asymmetry, where the gatekeepers held all the power. And now?
Now we are in the messy transition phase. We are trying to move into the age of autonomy and self-authorship.
The text actually references Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs here, which I found fascinating.
It's a perfect fit. For thousands of years, civilization was completely stuck at the bottom of the pyramid. Food, shelter, basic physical safety.
And we built all our institutions just to cover those bottom bases.
But once technology permanently solves those bottom layers, the only thing left to focus on is the top. Self-actualization.
Buckminster Fuller is quoted here. He said the ultimate goal is to make the world work for 100% of humanity, not just to keep them from starving, but to actually free them to be fully human.
So synthesizing all of this, a truly mature civilization doesn't perfect control. It outgrows it.
It's kind of like raising a child. A good parent has a lot of strict rules for a toddler. Don't touch the hot stove, don't run into the street.
Right, but if you are still violently enforcing those exact same rules when your kid is 40 years old, you have completely failed as a parent.
And civilization is the parent, and we are the kids. We're essentially in our rebellious teenage phase right now.
And we are fast approaching the point where we need to move out of the house.
So bringing this all back down to reality, because, most of us listening still have to go to work tomorrow. We still have to pay our taxes. What do we actually do with this framework today?
I think the biggest takeaway is that concept of artificial scarcity. We need to start looking at the systems around us through that specific lens.
Once you see it, you really can't unsee it.
You start realizing that so many of the barriers and rules in our lives aren't there because of the laws of physics. They aren't there because there genuinely isn't enough to go around. They are there simply because someone or some massive institution needs to justify its own existence and its budget.
Whether it's the outdated copyright laws that lock away human knowledge, or the meaningless busy work at your corporate office, or exactly the way your local school is structured to demand compliance.
We need to constantly ask, is this rule actually here to protect us from real harm? Or is it just here to maintain a hierarchy that is totally obsolete?
That is the challenge to leave you with today. Look at your own life and ask yourself, what in your world is only scarce because we collectively decided to make it scarce? And what would happen if we just let it go?
The global maxima of freedom is waiting for us. We really just have to get out of our own way.
A massive mind-bending topic today. Thanks for taking the plunge with us.
Always a pleasure.
See you in the future.